Hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining our emotional literacy webinar this afternoon, and thank you because it's such a hot afternoon. Both Hayley and I are very hot and bothered, but really pleased to be here sharing with you our really exciting brand new emotional literacy resources. This afternoon we're going to give you a whiz-stop tour of what's included, why we created them, the rationale behind that, and then different strategies and ways that you can embed them into your existing Jigsaw teaching. Before we start, we'll just introduce ourselves. So my name is Amy Jones. I'm an early years teacher and I work for Jigsaw as an early years and primary PSHE specialist. I spent several years in the classroom, predominantly in reception, and absolutely loved it. And emotional literacy is something that I'm really passionate about and really keen to kind of really bring into Jigsaw. And I'm also program lead for Jigsaw Outdoors and Games as well. And I'm joined by lovely Hayley.
Hi, I'm Hayley Allen. I'm a Jigsaw Associate Consultant, but I'm also a full-time early years leader and an SLE for PSHE on the South Coast. And I've worked with Jigsaw really from the very beginning, from 2012, so it's really exciting that I can be here today to join Amy and work with you with this project.
Thanks, Hayley. We're also joined by our lovely programme lead, Sarah Brough, who isn't on the screen, but she's here on hand to answer any further questions that you might have towards the end. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box, and we'll have a little bit of time towards the end to answer them. So, without further ado, today's session, as I said, is an introduction to our emotional literacy resources. First of all, I will cover with you the what, the why, and the how of why we created them and how you can start to use them in your classroom. Then we'll be moving on to the teacher guidance document that we created, which is essentially an overview of everything suitable for your specific year group. So we have one for Key Stage 1, Lower Key Stage 2, and Upper Key Stage 2. And if you're an early years teacher listening, you might be wondering, where's mine? But don't panic, because Hayley and I are both massive advocates for everything in early years, and as part of our phase 2 development for the emotional literacy work, we have plans for early years. So one will be coming your way not too long, hopefully. Then we will move on to the emotional vocabulary progression overview, which includes a range of progressive vocabulary that's age and stage appropriate. We will cover the core, the complex, and lesson-specific vocabulary. And then we'll move on to Hayley, who will be talking to you about the self-regulation and executive functioning vocabulary, as well as the supporting materials that we've got for you, which makes this really accessible for children, including things like a feeling scale, motion coaching resources, and our brand new STAR framework, which you might have spotted if you've looked at any of our newly updated lesson plans as part of our RHSE review. And as I say, at the end, we'll have an opportunity to answer any questions if you have any. So, firstly, why did we create these resources? So every jigsaw puzzle is already intentionally planned to include emotional literacy opportunities. So this is not to replace anything that you're already doing. This is essentially to support and enhance already the really good practice that you'll have in your classroom. You might already be using other sort of additional resources. We know, there's things like Scribble Spot or My Happy Mind, those sorts of things. And these resources can sit alongside that. They're not designed to replace. They're designed to be an extension to support the work that you're already doing in your school and your classroom. Emotional literacy, just as an overview, focuses on recognising, naming and understanding feelings. We know that it's really important for children to develop these skills, and what research tells us is that having strong emotional skills equips children to be able to navigate challenges that they face in their lives, build positive relationships with their peers and others, and of course maintain good mental health, which we know is really important. Our resources also give teachers more options that are flexible and suited to be weaved into already daily classroom practice, as I say, but also not just during PSHE lessons. It might be when children return from break times. It could be a reflection at the end of the day. So these are sort of resources that you can use and weave in ways that work best for you. We also know that this is something all children really need. Teachers have been asking for this for ages, and I'm sure Sarah will be sat behind the screen thinking, hooray, the day has come where we're presenting this to you. And it's really to support the whole school approach that we are passionate about here at Jigsaw. As I said before, all these resources are suited for primary age pupils. So we have the Key Stage 1, Lower Key Stage 2 and Upper Key Stage 2. So if you're a combined year group teacher, obviously you'd pick the one that's most relevant for you, that's got the teacher guidance overview, and it's all really there clear for you, so you don't have to go scrambling around. Finally, we also created these because the brand new RSHE guidance, which has the wording on the next slide, which I'll pop up now. Bear with me. It really is focused in this document. So we created these in response to the statutory guidance as well, because the expectations for children to explore and develop key skills around relationships and health and wellbeing are really clear throughout this guidance. It's specifically stated in two statements, which are under the GW, which stands for General Wellbeing statements. And we know schools are working really hard to address this. So we're trying to give schools as much option and flexibility to embed this into daily teaching as possible. I won't read them out word for word, but essentially, to summarise these, GW3, so General Wellbeing 3, is really about helping children understand the range and scale of emotions. So including feelings of like worry or feeling down and normalising those feelings. And GW4 is about building the vocabulary children really need to recognise and talk about feelings. So our resources give you the practical tools to help you meet those expectations in a progressive and consistent way. So the teacher guidance that I was just talking about then, so we have one for each key stage 1, 2 and 3. So you can see a little preview on the screen there of what that document looks like. Each teacher guidance document essentially brings together all the tools and approaches in one place for you to access, which we'll talk about specifically what those things are later in the training. But the key message is that these are flexible. You don't have to work through them like a tick list. You certainly don't have to do everything that's in there. Remember, you're the classroom teacher, you'll know what works best for you and the children in your room. So choose the ones that you think are, going to work for you. We are going to talk about them in greater detail later on in the session. But there are also things in here that you might start to notice in some of our updated lessons, such as our brand new STAR framework. And this is weaved into lessons naturally, so children kind of have that opportunity to be familiar with that as well. As I say, you can use them in ways that best suit your classroom. So it might be for an individual child, it might be small groups, or you might adopt this as a whole class approach. It's completely up to you. So within the teacher guidance document, we have an emotional vocabulary progression overview. We've got one for the whole school, and that does actually include early years because we've mapped the vocabulary for early years children, both nursery and reception. But in the teacher guidance overview, we've essentially taken a snippet out that's specific to your year group, so you don't have to go scrolling through the entire document. We've also got a feeling scale, sentence stem starters that you can use with children to give them the language and model the vocabulary, open-ended question prompts, emotion coaching, and as I say, the STAR framework, which we'll talk about a little bit more in this session. So moving on to the emotional vocabulary overview, Hayley and I, have worked so hard and tirelessly on trying to choose the correct vocabulary that aligns with the puzzles that we have and the different themes and topics that are explored throughout the year with our puzzles, but also with kind of what the guidance says that we need to cover as well. So there's real clear progression, and this includes core emotions as the top tier. So core emotions have been identified in the RSHE guidance as happy, sad, angry, worried, in brackets nervousness, scared and surprise. So these feature in every puzzle and are repeated throughout. This is deliberate so that all children can access lessons from the same starting point so that there are no barriers for participation and it's inclusive of all children. And then within each puzzle, we also have complex and varied vocabulary, which supports the RSHE General Wellbeing 4 statement, which ensures children are having a varied vocabulary. So these additional words have been really carefully selected to be developmentally appropriate for each year group. But also some of these are repeated so that they've got that consistency, and also they can build and develop a really rich vocabulary and real breadth of different emotions. As I say, this has been created to develop both children's developmental stage and the emotional concepts explored within each of these different lessons. So vocabulary is introduced, revisited, and extended in meaningful contexts as you teach the jigsaw lessons. Alongside the core and complex vocabulary, some lessons also have specific topics such as puberty or bullying, and there are additional lesson-specific words which are identified on the vocabulary list for the lesson plan. So you'll see that just as normal when you access your jigsaw lessons. Some words will be in addition on there. Hayley will talk a little bit more about some further vocabulary called self-regulation and executive functioning, and that's also mapped on there for you as well. We've separated them into a clear progression to really give clarity for teaching, but in practice, they all develop together and overlap all the time. And as I say, this isn't, a generic list. It's contextualized to kind of what children are already learning and developing their understanding of in the jigsaw lessons. So the core vocabulary, as I say, is repeated, the same words. So angry, sad, happy, worried, scared, and surprised. That appears in every year group, as I say. And by revisiting these foundational words throughout a child's primary journey as they move from one year group to the next, it really ensures that all children can access PSHE, and it's really important because then they have that same foundation where they can express their feelings, whatever their starting point. And it also means that children with strong language skills don't miss the chance to explore fundamental emotional concepts. Having rich vocabulary doesn't always mean children have had the space to really sit with what those words actually mean for them. So that's why we have the core, but then we also have the complex to give them that variety and real sort of depth of, how happy am I feeling? Am I elated, or am I calm and comfortable? There's a real scale, and Hayley will talk a bit more about that with you when we share the feeling scale later on. So in terms of how to use the vocabulary in lessons, I'm sure you have lots of ways you might already use vocabulary for other subjects in your sessions. But here are some suggestions that we thought of for you. So emotional vocabulary is developed most successfully when children encounter, hear, and use new words repeatedly, especially when they're used in meaningful contexts. So for instance, in a lesson, you might be covering a specific topic. You might start to model vocabulary naturally as children share ideas or their thoughts or feelings. You can also introduce and revisit some of these words as they arise naturally during your teaching. Class discussions, so as I say, as children share their thoughts, often during our calm me pause points with Jigsaw, Jerry, Cat, we often ask children to consider what they're thinking or what they're feeling. So those moments, sometimes we don't always ask children to share that as a class, but it may be that there's an appropriate moment where you do ask children if they feel comfortable to do that, and that could be a really good way to extend and model some of these words to them. Reflection activities, naturally there's opportunities there to consider how they're feeling, what are their thoughts about what you've discussed in the session today. That's a really, natural opportunity to do that. And of course, they ask me this questions, that really deepens emotional language by using children's responses to kind of introduce, revisit, or consolidate vocabulary. So there's lots of ways you can do it. And you might also have some tips and tricks in your sleeves anyway. So, use what works already for your class. As I say, kind of do it in that natural way that sort of builds on meaningful conversations and meaningful contacts for the children. So I'm going to hand over to Hayley now, who's going to talk you through some of our more specific resources within the pack.
Thank you. So the feeling scale, we know that emotions aren't simply on or off. and they vary in both type and intensity, and helping children recognise that these allows them to understand their emotional experiences much more accurately. So, for example, at the moment, I'm working with a little boy and he keeps telling me how angry he is a lot, but I don't think he really understands what angry is. So we've kind of talked about, because angry is obviously a very strong word to use. And then we started to talk about, well, are you a bit bothered by that? Are you a little bit upset by that? And helping him understand sort of the varying degrees of different feelings. So the feeling scale has been developed to support children in recognizing not only what they're feeling, but how strongly they are feeling it. For example, a child may move from feeling irritated to annoyed to angry and then eventually furious. And having the vocabulary to describe these changes then can help a child to make sense of what is happening for them. This is really important because emotional awareness comes before emotional regulation. And if a child can recognize when they're becoming frustrated or worried, they're more likely to use strategies before these feelings become overwhelming. I think it's really difficult when a child gets, say, to angry to help them then come down from that. But if you can see a child's being triggered and how they're starting to feel, there's obviously ways and means and strategies we can help a child start to deregulate, really. So obviously, if a child can recognise when they're becoming frustrated or worried, they're much more likely to use strategies before these feelings then become really overwhelming for them. Therefore, the scale can give us consistent language across a school. So rather than using different words in different classrooms, we're developing a shared emotional vocabulary that children hear throughout their time in school, which builds progressively from early years through to year 6. And you'll see quite a lot of the words then, as Amy was saying earlier, will be recapped and they'll be revisited each year, and then other wording on top of that, other language that children are able to use. They've then got a real breadth of emotional vocabulary that they're able then to describe different experiences and how they're feeling at the time. So there are suggested ways to use a scale, and none of this really is rocket science or nothing more for you to do. Really, it's to help you, because I think Amy and I were saying before when this project started, we're finding more and more children are coming in with very, very limited vocabulary to describe how they're feeling. And I think we said, and I think lots of children coming into school, their PSCD needs coming into early years, and we're looking at what can we do to support the children. And I think there were lots of different, I think when we unpicked it and we found there were 6 key emotions, 6 key core feelings, then you can then really build on that with the children. So the feeling scale isn't intended to be something that's only used during jigsaw lessons. The more that children hear and use this vocabulary in different contexts, the more meaningful it can become. So you can use it in planning and teaching, so thinking about which vocabulary you want to explicitly model and teach alongside the lesson. Again, during jigsaw lessons, using the scale to deepen discussions about characters, scenarios, and children's own experiences. This is often really helpful as well, I think, when you're doing something that you're detaching the child from the experience themselves. So maybe talking about a puppet or somebody in a book. This is then really useful again. Daily check-ins are supporting children to identify not just how they feel, but the intensity of that feeling. So often children are coming into school, maybe not wanting to be there first thing when they come in, needing a bit of a check-in during the day. I think that's really, really helps. And reflection times as well helps children think about whether their feelings have changed across the day and what has helped them. These emotions, some of them are so heightened, a child can't sustain that through the day, and there will be steps and signs for them of going, well, I'm actually feeling a little bit calmer now, and this is where I'm going, and they can see themselves coming down the scale as well as going up. Also, the ask me questions, so encouraging richer emotional vocabulary and discussion, again during jigsaw. And also behaviour or restorative conversations to support children to describe their feelings more precisely and reflect on how these feelings influence their behaviour. Within our setting, we have restorative conversations. And I think when you're able to use these, when children maybe are having, they've maybe become dysregulated, or perhaps they haven't, maybe they made maybe not a positive choice, it's then really, really useful to say to them, well, how were you feeling at the time? How are you feeling now? What can we do to support you? And also then to have them displayed in classrooms or calm spaces, so the language is always available and becomes part of the everyday conversations that we have with the children. I'd also really encourage, I think we use it in school as well, to use scale during co-regulation, so sitting alongside a child and wandering together. So whereabouts do you think you're on the scale at the moment? Because often children in a moment can't really be able to tell you. They just know that they're very cross or they're very upset. I think it's really helpful they've got an adult there to really co-regulate with them and give them that vocabulary that at that time they're not able to maybe access themselves or maybe think about how they're feeling. I also think it gives children language to express what they're experiencing whilst they're still learning to regulate those feelings. And as we said earlier, it really helps as well when sharing books. So story characters provide wonderful opportunities to explore emotions in a safe, removed context. So you might start to talk to children about, has the character stayed worried, or have they become anxious? Have their feelings changed during the story as well? And ultimately, the aim isn't for children to learn more feeling words, it's for them to understand themselves better, communicate their emotions more accurately, and gradually become more able to regulate their feelings and their emotions independently. And really, what we're doing is giving them a vocabulary and a language in order to help them build on that, really. Thank you. So, whilst we were looking at this body of work, we started to talk then, when you really start to unpick it, as well as then feelings and emotions and looking at the progression, we then said, well, where does self-regulation and executive functioning fit in here? So I think we've woven this in really about the vocabulary has woven through this project. So emotional literacy gives children a language to understand their feelings, whereas self-regulation helps them manage those feelings, and executive functioning provides the thinking skills they need to plan, focus, problem solve, and reflect. And we felt when doing this work that actually you can't have one without the other. All three are really interwoven together. And then therefore these strands support children's emotional well-being, their behaviour, and their learning. And we felt that when we make this vocabulary explicit within progression, then again, there's a more consistent approach across school, and then gives teachers the language to be able to model these skills alongside the emotional literacy, rather than teaching them in isolation. They're much more powerful when you can teach all three together. Thank you. So as I said, self-regulation and executive functioning are already embedded within the Jigsaw programme. For example, with Calm Me, which helps to develop self-regulation, while activities such as planning, problem solving, decision making, and reflection support executive functioning. And this progression within supporting materials simply makes the vocabulary more explicit, supporting consistent modelling and development from early years through to year 6. So I said it's nothing new, but it's already embedded, and what we've done is make it much more explicit. So as we've discussed, developing emotional literacy isn't just about introducing new vocabulary. It's also about giving children opportunities to use that vocabulary in meaningful contexts, so actually they understand what it is they're feeling and why they're feeling it. And these sentence starters that are included act as a scaffold, helping children move from simply naming an emotion to explaining it, understanding others' perspectives, and thinking how they might respond. So for some children, particularly younger children or those with speech, language, and communication needs, knowing the words isn't always enough. They also can need support in structuring what they want to say. So sentence stems reduce cognitive load and give children the confidence to express themselves. And often you can then also use those sentence stems yourself for a child to model to the child, and then the child can use that too. So I think we found, especially with some of the children that we work with in a mainstream setting, however, we've still got a lot of children with varying needs, that we're able to say, well, I'm feeling this, I wonder why I'm feeling this, and then also then bringing in their peers. So then that also then develops their empathy and understanding, and then also then helps them ultimately support self-regulation and the problem solving. So really it helps children then consider different perspectives and choose their helpful responses, as well as thinking about how they're feeling as well. As I said, sentence stems provide a scaffold to help children articulate their emotions. So just as we're using them in maths and in other subjects as well, I think really we've been missing a trick for a long time, thinking, well, do you know, for children, for their PSHE needs, I think sentence stems are amazing because they provide a scaffold to help children articulate their emotions, link their feelings to real experiences, and express empathy or regulation strategies. So firstly, they can name and explain their feelings. So I feel because I, and then they can start to then consider someone else's perspective. So they might be feeling because then this happened. And then they can then start to link their feelings to actions or regulation strategies. So when I feel this way, I can then use this strategy to help me. We've got a really helpful picture there of Jerry Cat as well to bring it together. So I feel, they might feel, and when I feel, I can. And I think when you look at it like that, that makes it so simple for a child and so much more straightforward. Especially, it might not happen within that moment, but afterwards, when a child's come down and maybe the situation is much calmer all round, then maybe start to then you can talk about with them after as well as a reflective conversation. Because often, sometimes if a child's particularly heightened, it's quite hard then to start to talk about naming their feelings and looking about somebody else's perspective. Because at the moment, that child's very much in their own mind and how they're feeling. But as I said, we've been using sentence stems for a long time in our school, and they really, really benefit the children. And we found them, especially when you co-regulate. And if a child sometimes hasn't got that language or isn't able to express themselves so articulately, for you to do it for them. So I'm feeling, or sometimes we also use it as an I wonder. So I wonder if you're feeling this way because, and I think all together, when you bring it all together, it's a very powerful model for children. So, emotion coaching is an evidence informed approach originally developed by clinical psychologists John Gottman and Julie Gottman. And the model centers on three key elements, which is recognizing, validating, and labeling emotions, setting limits with clear and consistent boundaries, and problem solving with the child. And it's an evidence, as I said, it's an evidence informed approach, and it's based on the understanding that all emotions are valid and that children need support from trusted adults to recognize, understand, and manage those emotions. So it's built on these three key principles, and they align really closely with the Jigsaw approach and underpin the emotional literacy work we've been exploring throughout the webinar. So we've also included emotion coaching resources because really it's all linked and it ties up really, really nicely. And we've put it in a really helpful lanyard for you. Who doesn't have a lanyard in a classroom? So we always find, especially when you're working with a child in that moment, and there's so much work you want to do with them at that particular moment, but there's other things going on for them, and you're looking around, scrabbling, thinking, I know what I want to say at this time, but there's other things going on. But I think if you have it as a lanyard, emotional coaching resources are very, very effective. So we use emotion coaching resources in our school, and we use them as part of our relationship and behaviour policy is based on emotion coaching, about building those relationships with children. And it's very, very straightforward, but the lanyard, the pictures in this lanyard is so effective to be able to use. And really, it's an aid memoir to be able to use in school. It's a quick prompt to remind us of the three stages of the emotion coaching, to provide examples of the language we might use when supporting a child. And it's particularly useful during those everyday conversations and moments when emotions are running high and we just need a reminder of the process. We've also reproduced each section as large prompt cards as well as the lanyard, and these can be displayed in classrooms, nurture spaces, or staff areas and used during professional discussions or as a visual reminder when you're becoming familiar with the approach. And it's really important to remember these resources aren't intended to be scripts that must be followed word for word. They provide a shared framework and consistent language that supports our professional judgment. So to begin with, in our school, I think people really had the words there because it's what we were following. But after a while, your child and the children in your setting, you'll just become part of your everyday practice. But initially, I think as you're getting to grips with it, and also I think often I think when you have children who are heightened in a classroom, and in that moment you're probably feeling heightened too, because obviously when emotions are running high, you're trying really, really hard to be calm. But in your head, you're thinking, are the children safe? What about this? What about this? There's so many other things going on. But I think if you've got this script in front of you, then you don't need to deviate. You've got something there to support you as an aid memoir at that moment in time. The aim is for emotion coaching to become, as I said, part of our everyday interactions with children, helping us respond in a calm, relational, and consistent way across the school. And I'm sure that most people are already doing this in their practice, but really what it does is sort of fine tunes it and make sure that perhaps we don't maybe skip one element of it, because all together, when it all works really powerfully, when it all works together. And as I said, we've really adapted this and adopted it as our whole school relational approach to supporting children with their emotions and behaviour. And as I said, we've now used these as part of it and developed it even further and find it even further for Jigsaw as a really helpful resource that hopefully people will be able to buy into and really find as effective as we have. And it's just 3 key elements which are really, really helpful and visual there. We also have a range of whole school resources that we use. We really want to reiterate that these resources are intended to be another initiative. I don't want to be sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, we've already got this, and we do this, and we do this. Really, it's everything you're already doing, it's just refining it. And it's not extra workload, because we know that teachers are really extremely busy and already have a great deal to think about throughout the school day. Instead, these resources have been designed to support and enhance the excellent practice, as I said, that's already taking place. A shared language, a consistent approach, and practical prompts that can be used when and where they're helpful. And you certainly don't need to use every resource, every lesson or every day. Dip into them as appropriate. It might be the fact that maybe your pastoral team in school, if you're lucky enough to have one, then maybe perhaps they might start to use it. It might be maybe there's a parenting course you run. It might be that might be introduced there. But over time, the aims of vocabulary and approaches simply become part of your everyday conversations and interactions with your children. And ultimately, it's not about introducing anything new, it's about making the great practice that's already happening even more consistent across the school. Because I'm also aware that some teachers maybe feel more confident in this, especially I think if you're a PSHE subject lead, we really understand the importance of this. But maybe if somebody else perhaps is who maybe is a different lead within school and who doesn't feel as confident, then these resources then can really help everybody. We've also got the STAR approach there that Amy touched on earlier. And there's also through this, there's documents that support you every step of the way, explaining the pedagogy and why we've chosen these approaches, and other tips and ways to use them. Is there anything you wanted to add there, Amy, about those?
I think you've done an amazing job explaining them, Hayley. Just to kind of add to the STAR approach, that's something that we've developed as part of our RSHE review. So throughout some of the lessons that you might adopt from September, once it becomes compliant, you might start to see the STAR be introduced in the classroom. So naturally, it's something that you might want to start using alongside and outside of the lessons as children become familiar with the language. But it's essentially 4 steps that invite children to kind of evaluate a situation, to consider, how safe they feel in a situation or a scenario, or it might be obviously a distanced example, but essentially it invites children to stop, notice what's happening, to think, and that doesn't involve making any actions in that moment. That's just thinking about, what they literally thinking, what they feeling, to assess and consider, what actions they might take, and using some of that self regulation and self-executive vocabulary. That is a really good opportunity to use that then. And then to react is obviously, what are they going to do next? So that's explained more in the teacher guidance document, but also, as I say, in some of the lessons that you'll see once you start teaching from September using them. And then finally, do you want me to cover this bit, Hayley?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, so you can find these resources on our Jigsaw platform. I think Sarah's put a link in the chat so you can directly access it there. And it's on the main screen where you can click into the Jigsaw Plus section. There's a new little icon with Jerry Cat, which says emotional literacy, and that's where you can click through, download the resources, print them off, and use them in your classroom. Okay, so that's everything Hayley and I wanted to cover. So if there's any questions, I don't know if there anything in the chat box, Jessie or Sarah, if you're
There's nothing at the moment. It looks like everyone is all okay. Yeah, no questions.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. It's been great to share these resources with you. Hayley and I are both really excited about them. Hopefully they make a impact on the children in your classroom.
Thank you.
Thank you.